Good morning, everyone. Welcome to MPark's Ubin Day 2020 webinar. We are very pleased to see all of you here. My name is Kaming, and I'm from the Pulau Ubin team at the National Parks Board. Pesta Ubin is our annual celebration of the different facets of Pulau Ubin, such as the natural and cultural heritage, during which there will be many activities happening in Ubin. Through these activities, we hope that everyone will be able to learn something about this beautiful emerald island of ours. As for Ubin Day, it is the last hoorah and the culmination of our long celebration. This year, as we can't gather due to COVID, the organizing committee has decided to bring the celebration to you through our first ever virtual Pesta Ubin and Ubin Day. Today is Ubin Day, so we have a very interesting lineup of talks ready for you. Here is an overview of today's talks. If you haven't signed up for any of these talks, fret not. You may still join us with the meeting links we share on Zoom chat, or watch them live on our YouTube channel, MParks SG. Earlier today, we looked into the history of kampong houses in Ubin. Now, let us wade into the muddy side of things. Mangroves have been destroyed and degraded around the world at a very fast rate, so it's imperative to restore them. However, restoring mangrove is not just about planting. Many mangrove projects have failed to re-establish despite massive planting efforts. There's more than meets the eye. So what might be the secret? Associate Professor Dan Fries will share with us today. Dan is an associate professor in the Department of Geography at the National University of Singapore. He leads the Mangrove Lab, a group of researchers dedicated to the research and conservation of mangroves in Singapore and Southeast Asia. Dan was also involved in the Restore Ubin Mangroves initiative, also known as RUM, a community-led group supported by MParks to promote mangrove restoration. For those on Zoom, if you have any questions during the talk, please send them to co-host Teo Kaming as a private message using the chat. We will try to address a few of them later on. Now, let us welcome Dan to share with all of us about mangrove restoration. Over to you, Dan.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Just let me share my screen. I'd like to start by saying thanks to National Parks Board for the invitation. I don't need any excuse to talk about mangroves. It's one of my favorite things to do. And also congratulations on a successful Pesta Ubin and Ubin Day. Okay, so I hope you can see my screen. Okay, working with nature to restore our mangroves. Let's get going. To start off with, really what I'm presenting is on behalf of a lot of people who have been involved in mangrove restoration in Singapore and in the region, who have helped shape some of the ideas that I'm going to talk about today. So really I'm presenting on behalf of a lot of really passionate people, some of which you'll see here, and I'll introduce some of them during the talk. I would also just like to thank Ria Tan and members of the Restore Ubin Mangroves initiatives for all of the awesome photos that you are going to see in this presentation. So thank you for their materials. Okay, let's start by looking at where our mangroves are in Singapore. A common question I get is that, do we even have mangroves? And we do. We don't have a huge amount compared to some other countries in the region. We have about 8 square kilometers or so of mangroves, but even in that small size, they still are really important to us. And they are mostly distributed along the north coast, as you can see. There's some in the south, And since we're on Ubin Day and talking about Pulau Ubin is a really important resource for our mangroves. It's the largest area of mangroves in the whole of Singapore. Okay, and even though they cover a small area, in Singapore, they are providing a range of benefits to us, or what we call ecosystem services. These are the benefits that the environment provides to people. And I'll just give you an example of some in Singapore that we benefit from. So mangroves are a great habitat for a lot of fish and shellfish species. They're almost like a nursery area. So at the very young life stage of a lot of animals, they do their juvenile stage in the mangrove forest. They're protected from predators within the mangrove roots until they can grow to a big enough size that, that they can then go onto the coral reef or into a seagrass or into the open ocean. And that's where we catch them and eat them, right? So even if we're not catching them directly, indirectly, a lot of commercially important fish species spend some part of their life cycle in the mangrove forest. In Singapore and around the world, mangroves are now very well known for protecting our coastlines from shoreline erosion and caused by big storms. And even in Singapore, even though we have small fragmented mangroves, the mangroves can still reduce the height of storm waves by almost 75%, even in Singapore. So they're helping to protect our shoreline assets. Now, mangroves are cool, and they're cool because they can cool the temperature around us. So mangroves are 3 degrees cooler than the surrounding industrial estates in Singapore. So they're helping to cool our local climate and reduce our urban heat island effect. And mangroves are also great at cooling larger scale temperatures. And particularly when we're thinking about climate change, mangroves are super carbon storers. They're able to store per hectare 3 to 5 times more carbon than any other type of forest. So they're really good at taking up our carbon emissions from the atmosphere, locking them into the trees and into the soil, and helping us mitigate some of the impacts of climate change. And then one that you might be more familiar with is just how accessible many of our mangroves are, particularly in Singapore, and that gives us great opportunities for recreation and education. So this is Sungai Buloh, and I'm sure many people have visited mangrove boardwalks, etc. Okay, so, but even though mangroves are awesome, we are still losing them, not as rapid a rate as we used to in the 70s and 80s, but we're still losing them. And Southeast Asia is the global hotspot for mangrove loss. And within Southeast Asia, there are particular hotspots that you can see on this map. But Singapore is also kind of a microcosm of some of those larger scale changes we've seen. So mangroves used to cover about 13% of Singapore's land area, and now it's less than 1%. So we've also experienced rapid mangrove loss, and then also the loss of those benefits that we were receiving. So trying to reduce mangrove loss and bring back some of those benefits or ecosystem services has really driven a lot of really big global scale targets for mangrove restoration. So the Global Mangrove Alliance, for example, has recently announced that we will increase global mangrove area by 20% by 2030. Last year, the Indonesian government announced they would be doing approximately 66,000 hectares of mangrove restoration every year until the year 2045. And in other countries, we see, for example, the Guinness Book of World Records, the world record for planting the most number of mangrove seedlings in 24 hours, which currently stands at over 1 million seedlings. So we have big, ambitious global and national targets to try and get back some of those benefits that we've lost. But with all the best intentions and targets in the world, so often this is what you see when you go to a restoration project on the ground, particularly in Southeast Asia. You'll see mangrove seedlings that have been planted in rows and they are all dead. And this is something that you see throughout the region, and mangrove restoration, unfortunately, has been notoriously unsuccessful despite the hundreds of millions of dollars of investment into these plantings around the world. So the question is, why is this the case? Why is it not easy to grow mangroves? Why, despite all of this effort and focus, are we still seeing really low success rates? Well, imagine you are a mangrove tree and you are going to grow somewhere. There are a few conditions that you have to work with. And this is not just for mangroves, this is for all plants. So for example, I am a terrible gardener. I kill everything I try and grow. And it's probably because I'm not taking into consideration all of the natural conditions that I need to grow plants. And mangroves are no different from that. The difference is that we have a lot more processes to think about in mangrove restoration compared to maybe a terrestrial forest restoration. So this is a tree in Czech Java, and this tree is maybe, I don't know, 30 years old. But how did it get there, and how has it grown to be a tall, mature tree? Well, first of all, a mangrove propagule had to float in to the site, so we had to have enough supply of mangrove propagules and seeds for them to establish. But they won't establish unless they land on a surface where the conditions are suitable. And there are two main things that control mangroves. And the first one is it has to be a calm place for mangroves to grow. If it's because they're on the coast, it's a very dynamic environment. If they're getting hit by waves all of the time, they're never possible for them to root into the soil. They just get dislodged and float away. So they need to have calm conditions with low wave energy for them to be able to root into the ground. And after they've rooted, they need to be in the right position or elevation in the tidal frame so that they're not flooded too much. There's a common misconception that because mangroves grow by the sea, they must love seawater. They hate it. It's hard, it's stressful to live there, but they can tolerate a certain amount of flooding by the tide. But if the elevation of the surface is too low, they'll be flooded too frequently, and ultimately they'll drown out. So these are the ingredients that we have to think about if we want to make restoration a success. And those previous photos I showed you, one or more of these conditions were probably not met. And so we didn't get successful restoration. So it's all about working with natural processes and not against them. And those are the philosophies of an emerging mangrove restoration technique called Ecological Mangrove Restoration, or EMR. And basically, EMR is about doing your homework before you do any mangrove planting. So when we're doing our homework, there are 6 steps that we follow in the EMR process. And the first is to, before you plant a single mangrove, is to understand what mangrove you're planting. What are its characteristics? What conditions does it thrive in? When does it fruit? How many propagules does it produce when it fruits, etc. Getting to understand the individual ecology so that you can match the environment to those characteristics. The second one is to understand the physical environment and the flooding and the hydrology, all the water flows, because different species will grow in different flooding conditions. So we need to understand what those conditions are to pick the most appropriate species. After that, after we know our baseline information, we have to ask, well, why isn't mangrove forests, why isn't restoration happening naturally already? What's constraining the site so that, because mangroves will naturally grow if all of those parameters I mentioned earlier are met. So let's assess why it's not working, and then we have to fix that, because whatever we plant or whatever we try and grow isn't going to grow if we don't fix the reasons that's constraining it in the first place. So those 3 steps have been largely kind of physical, talking about the physical environment, but actually the human component of the environment is also important in constraining mangrove restoration. So we have to assess those human constraints. Who owns the land? And are we physically able to do mangrove restoration at this site? Do we have enough labor to undergo the construction works, etc. And are the communities living near these sites invested, and do we have the buy-in from them to help support the restoration projects? Once we have all of that information, only then can we design the restoration project. So most of these restoration projects skip those first 4 steps and go straight to this step. And we need to do those homework steps so that we can design the restoration site in the best possible way to fix some of those issues. After we've done all of that, we should get natural mangrove regeneration. So there's actually could be no need to plant a single seedling. But planting is still okay, but you have to do it after you've done all of those steps and not before, because then you are giving your planted mangroves the best chance of survival. So those 6 steps are what we're currently going through on Pulau Ubin right now. And we're doing a study that will look to restore some abandoned aquaculture ponds in the southeast of Ubin, near Sungai Durian. And if you've ever cycled to Czech Jawa, you will have cycled right past these ponds without even knowing it. Now, these are what these ponds look like. They used to be mangroves, and then they were cut out. The mangroves were cut down, and the ponds were dug out for aquaculture. They were subsequently abandoned, but as you can see, there is no natural mangrove growth inside, so something is stopping it. And this is where the Restore Ubin Mangroves initiative came in. It is Singapore's first community-based and multi-stakeholder group dedicated to promoting mangrove restoration. There are a number of organizations that I'll introduce later, including academia and civil society and NGOs, and we're supported in these efforts by the National Parks Board. And so the Restore Ubin Mangroves initiative got together and thought about, how can we do mangrove restoration in the most cost-effective and successful way? And we thought about EMR. And so we undertook those 6 steps of ecological mangrove restoration in Singapore for the first time. And so the first step, as I mentioned, was to understand the species that you have. So we went into the field and we mapped where they were, we mapped when they were flowering, when they were fruiting, and we tried to understand the sort of environment they're already living in. Step 2 was to understand the physical environment and the hydrology. And for this, we did land surveying to map out the elevations of the land, and then used other sensors to map out the tidal flows. And for this, we used kind of general land surveying equipment, these sorts of instruments you'll see on the side of a road or in a construction site to work out elevations for planned construction. And for mangrove restoration, it's no different. We need to know the elevation of the abandoned ponds that want to be restored, and we need to understand the elevations the natural trees are already growing at so that we can match those 2 together. Now, it is messy work. It's fun work, but it's hard work and it's messy. Some of these ponds are very sloppy and the mud is really deep. But eventually, after dragging ourselves through the mangroves and the mud, we get to something like this. Now, this is a digital elevation model. So taking all of our surveying points and putting them into a 3D model to understand all the topography of the site. And so these are the ponds, and you can see in green the areas of high elevation, and these are basically the old pond walls for each pond, and then the low elevations in the middle of each pond. And these low elevations are where mangroves are currently not growing. So we take our digital elevation model, we take our information on the elevation at where all the different trees grow, and we try and match the 2 together. And so if we put those 2 sets of information together, we can come up with a prediction of where mangroves could grow currently in the site. And this is what you can see here. And so these are all different mangrove species that have different requirements. And we can see that in some sites, we can get this Soneratia alba species. It's one of the toughest mangrove species, can grow at the lowest elevations, can tolerate the most flooding, and that can grow in a few places. The other species, we don't really see them. We see them a bit around the edge. But what's most concerning is that this area of gray, where mangroves can't grow at the moment. And if we go into the field and look at the sites, we don't see mangrove in those places. So something is constraining it. And we think it's probably because they're too low in elevation, they're being flooded too much. So this map also helps us to figure out what parts of the site we need to go in and do some engineering and fix the elevation so that it's more suitable for mangroves to grow. So we've been doing all of the kind of the physical and natural environment mapping, but of course in EMR, there's a really important human and social component that we also have to understand in order to do successful restoration. So, for 2 years before we went and measured a single thing, for 2 years we were on Ubin, speaking to as many stakeholders as possible, local residents, visitors, MParks, other interest groups on Ubin, to understand what sort of restoration project all those different stakeholders would like, what the aims and objectives that they think are important, so that we could match the restoration project to the aims and the thoughts of everybody else. And so, say for 2 years, we did this before we did a single measurement, and that was through kind of very informal discussions, knocking on people's houses and having a chat about mangrove restoration, but then many other formal mechanisms, and in particular, a lot of stakeholder workshops. Some of these were based with various youth groups so that we could make sure that their thoughts and interests were represented, but then also stakeholder workshops where we got together people from various government agencies, various other interest groups and local residents, all in the room together, drawing on big pieces of paper to throw out ideas of, do we want this to be for research only, for conservation only? Should there be places where the public can access? Are there particular aspects that we want to promote, such as fireflies, etc.? So really to help get the community to help us design what the restoration might look like. And so this just involved sitting around, drawing on big pieces of paper and sharing knowledge with each other and discussing. And it was a long process, but for me, it was one of the most enjoyable processes in the whole project so far. Really getting to know and understand the motivations of everybody and why they think mangroves are important. And so to do that, communication has been really key, and that's really been a strong message throughout the entire Restore Ubin Mangroves initiative. And we've done that in lots of different ways. So pre-COVID, once a month or more, we were doing public walks to introduce mangroves to the public and show them some of the different mangrove areas in Ubin that are accessible. We also did once a month coastal cleanups. These were led by Nature Society Singapore, and again, cleaning up the restoration sites so that they're ready for restoration works to happen. But coastal cleanups, as well as cleaning up the site, they're also a great opportunity to get people connected to mangroves. We also participated a lot in festivals such as Pesta Ubin and Ubin Day, where we would, in normal times, we would have thousands of people coming to Ubin, and it gives us a great chance, again, to communicate the importance of mangroves. We also did some more research-led communication, so we would do demonstrations of the measurements that we were taking in the field so people could see what we were doing and could get involved. We also did mangrove identification workshops so that interested members of the public could help us understand the ecology of some of the different mangrove species that we find. So we brought everybody together, did a series of mangrove identification workshops to get people to be able to help create some of the data with us. And then we've done a lot of public outreach and communication in the newspapers, in documentaries in Channel News Asia and others, and also supporting student documentaries. This was one that was funded by the National Geographic by a student at Yale NUS. All of these are great ways to communicate the importance of mangroves, but also the philosophy of ecological mangrove restoration. And so all of this communication and the human aspect is really highlighted to us how important it is for collaboration. And the Restore Ubin Mangroves initiative, I think, is a great example of a bottom-up, community-led initiative where collaboration has been at the heart of it. So there are a number of organizations involved in RUM, including Ria Tan from Wild Singapore, the Nature Society Singapore, GARS, Game Fish and Aquatic Rehabilitation Society, Sea Angel, and the Ubin Fish Farmers, as well as academics such as myself at NUS and partners at the National Parks Board. So as you can see here, this is researchers from NUS and colleagues from MParks going out in the field together to help collect some of these data together. So, to summarize all of that and to wrap up, mangroves are awesome. Please spread this hashtag on Instagram and Twitter. But they are really important for our coastlines. Even if we only have small amounts of them in Singapore, they're still providing some really important benefits that we take for granted every day. They're doing it in the background, and we never realize exactly what they're doing for us, but they're just working tirelessly in the background for us. Now, we can restore some of those really important benefits, but we have to work with nature and not against nature in order to do that in the most successful and cost-effective way. And similarly, we have to work with and not against people. Mangrove restoration only works if everybody is on board, everybody's going in the same direction, and everybody has the same motivation to bring back mangrove forests. And finally, when I talk about collaboration and communication, it's not just collaboration between the partners in the Restore Ubin Mangroves initiative, but we need your help to do it as well. RUM is open for anybody to join and for anybody to take part. And you can take part in lots of different ways, from helping us to communicate the importance of mangroves and telling everybody and spreading the word about how great mangrove forests are. But as I also gave you some examples, we need your help to collect some of the information as well that helps us design and understand what the restoration project might look like. So this is a great opportunity for anybody, whether or not you have previous experience in mangroves, as long as you have the interest and the motivation, we need your help. So if you want to get involved and you want to find out more, please check out some of these web links. Join our Facebook group, which will give you all the updates on events that are happening, where you can get involved. And if I can ever help with any mangrove related questions, please drop me a line. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dan. Okay, now we will come to the Q&A session, but let me share my screen first. Okay, we have quite a number of questions that were being asked. So in the interest of time, we will just go through a few of them. Okay. You all can see my screen? Okay. Question 1. Dan, what interests you about mangroves?
What interests me about mangroves? I love mangroves because they are so weird. They look strange. They're not a type, a lot of people are familiar with forests, but mangroves are just different. Their trees look different. The roots are different. So they're a very mysterious ecosystem that not many people are familiar with. I think that's what first got me interested in them. Then I got interested because I realized kind of how hard it is for mangroves to survive, and that they must be really special plants if they can survive in the coastal environment. If I asked you to stand along the coast for 24 hours, you would find it pretty stressful, and so do mangroves. They have to survive a lot of different things, but they manage it, and so they're really kind of unique in that respect. And so I think that's what got me also interested. And then there was a third thing that got me interested in mangroves, and it was about the human mangrove interactions and how I started to realize that millions of people along our shorelines around the world rely on mangrove forests for their day-to-day needs and livelihoods. And I just really understood the importance of them. Even in Singapore, but even more so outside of Singapore, they really do support the livelihoods and the health of millions of people. And so all of those things together just made me realize what an amazing ecosystem they are.
Yeah, actually it's true that mangroves are more queer than the rest of the habitats. So can you share with us how many types of mangroves are there? I assume that the person asking is probably either locally or regionally.
Okay. I can answer that in a couple of different ways. First of all, we can talk about the mangroves as in just the trees. So how many different types of mangrove trees are there? And it might surprise you, but we don't actually quite know. We still debate and argue exactly what is a mangrove tree and what is not. But we think we have about 65 to 70 different species of mangrove trees. And in Singapore, we have about 35 of those species. So we have, we represent a large proportion of the world's mangrove tree biodiversity. But then we can talk about the mangrove forest as an ecosystem. And then we think there are a couple of different types, because mangrove forests in Southeast Asia are very different to mangrove forests in the US or Australia, for example, in terms of the type of species, the type of mud, where you find them. So mangroves are a really diverse ecosystem. In Southeast Asia, we have trees that are 40 meters high and we have 30 species. In some parts of the US, the trees are 1 meter high and we only have 3 species. So they're really diverse, and there are lots of different types of mangroves out there.
So then perhaps question 3 is kind of related to question 2 in the sense that you have already answered that it's both a habitat as well as plants. Can I say that?
Yep, and we often use the term interchangeably. So there are mangrove trees that exist in the mangrove ecosystem. And the mangrove ecosystem, obviously the trees are a major component of that, but they're not the only component. We also have all the mud and the soil and the physical environment, and then we have all the crabs and all the animals we find, and then all the microbiology that we find as well. There's fungi and new bacteria and all sorts of stuff that all contribute to making up the mangrove ecosystem.
Okay. So let me move on to the next question. How is the biomass of mangroves determined? Can we make use of technology such as UVA or quick LiDAR scan equipment to help speed up mangrove assessment?
Cool. Wow, this is a very interesting and specific question. Maybe I'll break it down a little bit for the audience. So biomass refers to all of the tree and the trunk and the leaves and the branches and all of that stuff. That's called the mangrove biomass. And we're interested to measure that because this is one estimate of the carbon that is locked up and stored by mangroves. So it's important to accurately determine the mangrove biomass so we can estimate the mangrove carbon that is stored. And we can use lots of technologies such as drones or UAVs and LiDAR, which is a type of, similar to radar, but uses light, and it helps us to quickly understand the shape of the trees. So we can use a lot of technology, and we have been using things like satellite imagery. And we've also used a terrestrial LiDAR, which is on a tripod that helps scan the biomass and make these 3-dimensional models. But actually, the easiest way to measure biomass, and even if you do these technological options, it's not a substitute for physically going into the field with a measuring tape, measuring the trunk of the mangrove. I cannot tell you how many thousands of mangrove trees I have measured individually, and that is the most, those field-based measurements help us to then use these other technological methods, but you have to use a mix of both.
Okay. Now the next question is, does mangrove have economic value? If so, which part of it can we use?
Great question. And so those ecosystem services or benefits that I talked about earlier, many of them do have an economic value. You can put a dollar value to them. So for example, fish or shellfish that are harvested from the mangrove obviously have a market price, so that they can be valued in that way. In many parts of the world, mangroves are used for forestry products, so for wood chip, for paper and pulp, or for charcoal, or for construction materials to build dwellings. And of course, they have an economic value as well. The carbon that's locked up in mangroves and is helping us mitigate against climate change also has an economic value, because we can conserve ecosystems by quantifying the carbon that's stored in them and then selling those as carbon credits for protection. And all sorts of, and that's just a few examples, but there's most of the other ecosystem services can also have some kind of direct or indirect economic value. I'll just give a rejoinder to that economic values are not the only values that mangroves have. And actually, some of the non-economic values might be even more important. Some of the social and cultural values of mangrove can be really important. For example, the mangrove forests have a strong religious or spiritual value to a lot of communities. And of course, you can never put a dollar value on that, nor should you, right? Because those are values that differ between different people, but they are kind of priceless values as well. So when we try to think about what is the value of mangroves, we do economic analysis, but we don't do that on its own. We also try and understand more holistically the true value that you can't put a price on. Thanks.
True. It's very intangible for some of the benefits we have. Okay. We still have quite a number of questions, but in the interest of time, we'll probably just cover what we have, maybe two more, maybe. How important is sediment type to mangrove restoration? Can you plant mangrove at reclaimed sites?
Mangroves are pretty straightforward to grow in lots of different conditions. They're pretty resilient. So we do find some mangroves growing obviously in mud. We do see some growing on sandy shores. We do see some growing on coral reefs where there's very little sediment at all. So they can, depending on the species you choose, they can grow on in lots of different sediment types. The first thing to do is to test. If you have for example, a reclaimed site, is to test if mangroves will grow in those conditions with the species that we have at hand. And if they don't, then we have to think about how we can do hybrid or ecological engineering so that we can do, for example, this reclaimed site, but also create space and conditions suitable for mangroves to grow as well. So there is definitely opportunity to combine the two. And sometimes when we do mangrove restoration, we have to think a little bit more innovatively about some of these kind of unusual sites, such as reclaimed sites, that might be suitable to support at least some level of mangrove forest. Yeah.
I see. Okay, final question. Is mangrove conservation being successful globally and in Singapore?
So in general, we tend to think that mangroves conservation has increased in its success. So we have, in conservation can mean restoration, but also the protected areas and other things. So even though restoration, I mentioned at the beginning, isn't as successful, it's, we're now learning through EMR and other techniques to increase the success. And then other conservation methods such as protected areas and policies have been increasing their success globally. So, and we have evidence to show that, because mangroves, we think, used to be lost at 1% to 3% per year globally, loss of area in the 70s and 80s and 90s. But since the turn of the century, now mangroves are only being lost at maybe 0.2% per year. So almost an order of magnitude reduction. Now, 0.2% per year is still 0.2% too much, but it shows that we've brought down the rate of mangrove loss globally. And we see a similar pattern in Singapore, where actually our mangrove area in Singapore has been relatively constant now for a number of years. And in fact, in some places may even be increasing because we've had successful restoration projects on Semakau and other places. So there is light at the end of the tunnel, and mangroves, I think, are a good conservation success story. And they give us cause for a bit of optimism for conservation more broadly, but we can't be complacent, and there's still a lot more work to be done.
Okay, thank you, Dan, for such an enlightening session. In the interest of time, we have to move on. It's so true that we should work with nature and not against nature. We need to ensure that the right conditions for seed growth and re-establishments are present first, and before we know it, nature will find its way back on its own. It's also amazing that you raised out the point on how powerful synergy can be when people come together, such as the partnership between government, academic institutions, as well as community groups. Indeed, unity is strength. And if you are interested to be part of the effort or learn more about Dan's group, please check out the RAM website. You may access the links that we share on the group chat, on the Zoom chat, sorry. Mangrove is not the only habitat that could be found in Ubin. In Chek Jawa, we have not one, but 6 major habitats that meet. To find out more about this congregation of habitats, please check out our newly released MParks virtual tour to Chek Jawa in the Ubin Day 2020 playlist on MParks SG YouTube channel. If that's not enough to satiate the curiosity of all the nature lovers out there, do check out another virtual tour by MParks. This tour takes you to Ketam Mountain Bike Park, one of the species recovery sites on Ubin. Up next at 1 p.m. on Ubin Day webinar, we will be joined by Colin and Albert, the founders of Accessible Ubin. Ever wonder if wheelchair users are able to visit Ubin? Last year, MParks, together with Accessible Ubin, announced the plan of building a wheelchair-friendly floating pontoon jetty. If you would like to find out more about Accessible Ubin and this new jetty, this talk is for you. This brings us to the end of this session. Thank you, Dan, once again for sharing with us. And thank you to all of you for tuning in. We hope you've enjoyed the session. For our YouTube audience, we'll say goodbye to you first. Do share your feedback with us by accessing the URL in the description below. And for our Zoom audience, please stay on for a short while for us to take a group photo together. To our YouTube audience, hope to see you again later. Bye.